Welcome to another episode of Framing the Hammer, the podcast produced by 4A Arts, American Alliance of Artists and Audiences, where we believe that American arts, culture, design, and craft are basic human rights and powerful tools for a whole and healthy society. We work to change the narrative around American creativity for our society and elected leaders so that the creative economy is supported at a level commensurate with its impact on the entire American economy. I went off script. Today, I'm joined by Bianca Bosker, New York Times bestselling author of Cork Dork, and most recently, Get the Picture, a recounting of her deep dive into the art world as a gallerist, art assistant, and museum guard. Bianca, welcome to Framing the Hammer.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here with you.
So what stands out as a pivotal artistic moment in your child affecting how you see and approach art today?
You know, I think that one of the works that really stopped me in my tracks, I think I had to be sometime when I was in high school, is I saw Salvador Dali's Lobster Telephone.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the piece, if people haven't seen it, it's basically, if I recall correctly, like a black rotary telephone with a orange, pretty lifelike looking plastic lobster kind of spooning the handle of the telephone.
Yes, spooning the handle. Yep.
And I would say that, you know, for that piece, I just remember it. It was one that really woke up in me the potential for artworks to really have this internal life all their own. That, you know, that they were really this portal into something else, into other thoughts, into other ideas, into other states. And I just remember sort of having this realization that, you know, an artwork was kind of more than the sum of its parts. And I would say, you know, at that period of my life, I was so passionate about art. I mean, I was a voracious painter. I wrote about art. You know, I had dreams of applying to art school.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, it was soon after seeing that piece that my relationship with art began to wither. You know, Get the Picture is really the result of feeling like I was missing something in my relationship with art. For a long time, art and I were not on speaking terms. And that didn't, you know, keep me up at night until one day it really did.
In your book, you go into a wonderful description of what is beautiful and or the way the art world frowns upon beauty and often gives art a higher calling for, you know, ideas and provocation and whatnot. Did you or do you now think Salvador Dali's Lobster Telephone is beautiful?
Oh, interesting. I can't remember sort of what my internal barometer for beauty was back as a high schooler, but you know, I'm looking it up. I'm like, I'm see it while we talk about it. You know, I think it is beautiful. You know, I think for me, you know, as I mentioned, like this, as I conceive of it, like, you know, this book is really, as you mentioned, this multi-year deep dive into the art world where, like you said, I sold art at galleries, I worked for artists in their studios, I patrolled museum wings as a security guard, all as part of this journey to understand why does art matter and how do any of us engage with it more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say along the way, I began to realize, I guess I began to rethink our relationship with beauty. Perhaps naively, you know, I thought that beauty was maybe something one would find in art and contemporary art. And it didn't take me long to have it drilled into me that according to the art world, according to, I would say, polite society in general, beauty was off limits. Beauty was considered kind of, you know, it's kind of an insult to call someone's work beautiful. Many artists treated it as their sworn enemy. I mean, I got countless lectures on the evils of the B word. But, you know, beauty has come, I think, for a lot of the sort of intelligentsia to be viewed with suspicion. It is corrupted and corrupting. It is, you know, sort of passé, and falling for its charms is sort of considered the sign of moral weakness. I couldn't disagree more. I mean, I think beauty, like art, is not a luxury. It is absolutely essential. And that's not to say that beauty is always the visual or spiritual equivalent of a vanilla cupcake, right? Beauty can be a sunset. Beauty can be a bouquet of flowers. But in my experience, like beauty can also be the sewage treatment plant over, you know, in Brooklyn, right? Where you've got these huge, like shit tit digester eggs,
Yes.
full of sewage, you know, and I think art helped me really expand my concept of beauty. And I think that beauty, as I came to understand it, is sort of that moment when our minds jump the curb. Like beauty is something that just pulls us deeper into life. It nudges us into a place where we're wondering about our life and our place in it. I should say beauty nudges us into a place where we're wondering about the world and our place in it.
Mm-hmm.
Beauty is sort of this ecstatic, like hell yes for life. I mean, I think there is something very, I think there's something nihilistic about denying ourselves beauty. Beauty is
Mm-hmm.
physical. We have evolved to enjoy it. And so I think in that sense, yeah, I mean, the lobster telephone is absolutely beautiful in the sense that, at least in my own experience, it's been a while since I've seen it in person, you can't look away, right? It's just, it drew me deeper into life. It made me stop and ask questions. It made me want to be close to it, to linger in its presence. And I think that's what beauty does. And in that sense, beauty can be planes taking off. It can be a math equation. It can be a painting.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, at the end of the day, crucial.
I think that cruciality, the crucial aspect that you just said, is something that we very much believe at 4A Arts, which is we feel like people have a basic human right to pleasure. And the word pleasure often can almost seem, I don't know, salacious. But what we mean is everybody should have the experience of pleasure in their everyday lives, and that pleasure can come from beauty, especially in the expansive definition you just gave it. And and it's sad to think that beauty would be denied because that's such a rich human experience. And I feel like reading your book, it was the pleasure was denied an awful lot in service of the game and the dance, as you call it, the dance, 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 and the that voracious drive for being in context and salesmanship. And it's that humane aspect is really lost a lot in a lot of what you experienced, I think. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly not everywhere, but I was, as I started working at galleries and I was like painting walls and writing press releases, I began to be initiated into what I now describe as like the strategic snobbery of the art world. And that, there's a lot about that took me by surprise. I think kind of naively, based on sort of everything that the art world advertises about itself, I expected to find this, group of like free thinking individuals who just wanted to like embrace as many people in the warm hug of art as possible. Now, of course, those people are out there, but it took me a while to find them. I think that instead, I began to meet, I had this goal, right? I wanted to immerse myself in the nerve center of the fine art world because I wanted to, I think that these are the people that play an outsized role in influencing our idea of art and why we should bother to engage with it. And when I say throw myself in, I mean it rather literally. I am a journalist. I do interviews and I read books, research reports. But I also really wanted to go and work there. I wanted to like sell art. I wanted to stretch canvases, and I eventually did do that. But getting access was incredibly difficult, which was sort of my first lesson in the secrecy of the art world. I think I started reaching out to people, hoping to ask them what I considered rather basic, innocent questions like, how do you do art? Why does this matter? And instead of answers, I got threats, warnings, like people telling me that what I wanted to do was impossible, maybe even dangerous. And, I will say that it's not only journalists, right? As I began working in galleries, like I began to realize that there are many different ways that the fine art world tries to keep the general public, the Joe Schmoes, as my boss referred to them, at arm's length. And, that ranges from sort of certain putting rules around how to communicate, dress, behave. I was told that I needed a makeover, right? Severe haircut, no jewelry. I should tone down my superficial enthusiasm, as you may have noticed.
Yes.
True art connoisseurs tend to discuss art in this like, affectless monotone that makes them sound like they're running out of batteries. I was told to like nix certain words from my vocabulary. A piece is not sold, it's placed. It's not a website, it's an online viewing room. Art speak, of course, crucial, as it was told to me, to fit in, right? So these days, to sound like you know something about art, the trick is basically to sound like a French professor who's been the victim of a bad translation job, which there are arguments that is exactly what it's based on. But even where people put their galleries, right, in New York, but not only in New York. I was just talking to someone in Santa Fe, said it's similar there. Like, a lot of galleries are located less like stores than speakeasies. They're very hard to find. They tend to omit helpful words like art or gallery.
Hmm.
And I think what was also, I think, distressing for me is a big part of my journey was I wanted to develop my eye, right? An eye,
Hmm.
not just being the organ, but to art connoisseurs, that way of looking at art that enables you to see a lot more than meets the eye, right? Like, who will be the next Warhol, or like what is transcendent about, I don't know, a few smears of colored rock on cloth, or a painting,
Hmm.
as it's commonly known.
Yeah.
And artists told me that I lacked visual literacy, which they said was downright dangerous in a world so saturated with images. And what I
Right.
found frustrating is that these deliberately erected barriers to entry, which served to build mystique, to concentrate power in the hands of gatekeepers, to maintain art as the exclusive purview of a self-anointed few. These deliberately erected barriers to entry applied not just to looking at the art, but also understanding it.
Hmm.
So, again,
Not
I
to
was
mention
trying.
experiencing it and enjoying it and
Right,
having a
right.
humane experience with it.
Right. I think that's where the context comes in, right?
Hmm.
Because, I just found that so many of these art connoisseurs spent surprisingly little time discussing the merits of the artworks themselves.
Hmm.
And instead they asked, where did this artist go to school? Who else owns the work? Who is he sleeping with? Who are her friends? And that's the so-called context around a piece, right? That's sort of the web of names that go along with the artist, the social capital that goes along with them. And that seemed to influence people's opinions of the work so much more than the piece itself. And that bothered me. It
Hmm.
bothered me because I think that emphasis on context is one more way to keep out the rest of us, right? To keep out the
Absolutely.
schmoletariat, right?
The
I think these
wait,
connoisseurs become that much more necessary if we're told that we need, years of going to art fairs and the right personality to commune with a painting. And so it wasn't until I really started working in artists' studios that I think I began to discover a different way of engaging more deeply with the work on my own terms.
I appreciate you taking us on that entire journey there, because something I was going to point out um, halfway through what you were just saying is that you're talking about the context and the exterior forces, but so rarely about the actual art itself. One of my favorite quotes from the book was, looking at artwork during a show was like looking at crown molding during an orgy. Your fantastic way with words is replete throughout the book, but it's sad that so often the art was not the point. Did you have, well, no, you described several times in experiences with the gallery owner that you worked with, or the gallery manager, and when you were in Miami, those people did have relationships with the art, and they were smart. They knew how to explain why they liked the art, but so often it was just about the surrounding game. But I'm glad to know that you did find your eye, and that you were reminded that you already have an eye. We all have the ability to experience art, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, yes, the quote is slightly different. I think it's like discussing the art was like complimenting the crown moldings at an orgy. Um,
I swear I wrote that down word for word,
sorry,
but thank
yeah,
you.
no, no.
Well done.
But yeah, but I think that for sure. I mean, look, I think that, as I said, the guiding questions for me were really like, why does art matter, and how do any of us engage with it more deeply?
Hmm.
Now, it will not surprise you to know there are many answers to those questions.
Of
And I hope that
course.
readers will
It's
agree that they
endless.
find many different answers to those questions in the book. Now, that being said, I will say that I felt partial to certain answers. They resonated more with me. Now, I think that, what is remarkable is that, what I should say is like, as I said, I think something really clicked for me as I sat on artists' floors, like stretching canvases and painting
Hmm.
backgrounds. And I think I began to understand how to really savor art like an artist. And if you've ever gone to see art with an artist, versus, I don't know, a curator or a collector, I think it's a different experience. I remember once
Sure.
going to see one show, and I first went with a curator, and then I later went with an artist. And the latter just blew my mind. I mean, it was like I hadn't even seen the same artwork. It just,
Hmm.
and I think that, you know all of us, of course, have our own eye as it is, but I think that's not to say that we can't do a little better, right? There's studies that show that the average amount of time that we spend as museum visitors looking at an artwork is 4 times less than the amount of time we spend reading the wall labels of those artworks. And that's,
Yes.
2 seconds on the art versus 8 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And we're biased viewers. There's so many things that influence our opinions of a work of art that again have nothing to do with the work itself. Now, I think that what was striking to me about working in artist studios and why it was so influential in shaping my own eye was that it felt like such a far cry from the way that art was discussed elsewhere. I think that there's so much like hushed murmuring about postmodernism and historicity and indexicality that goes on in galleries and museums. And really for the last 100 years, we've been told that what really matters about an artwork is the idea behind it. The thought trumps the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But making art is practically athletic, right? Like none of that kind of emphasis on ideas prepared me for the blistery business of actually making art.
Mm-hmm.
As the artist Julie Curtis, who I worked for, told me, an idea is not a painting. Painting is constant decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, savoring art like an artist, it meant I needed to slow down. I needed to examine the physical form. I needed to consider the artist's decisions. And that for me had such a powerful effect on how I then went back and looked at art. I would go back to galleries and museums, and for the first time in my life, I did not read the wall labels. I totally ignored them. And that I cannot emphasize how unusual that was for me. I mean, I used to think it was downright rude and inconsiderate when galleries didn't put up, a paragraph long explanation for each artwork.
Right.
But I came to think that, those labels are, as Julie pointed out, I mean, it's sort of like you're trying to have a conversation with the work and someone keeps interrupting.
Mm-hmm.
They're also a bit like answer keys at the bottom of like a word search. I think that they begin to tell us that there's a singular right answer to looking at the work, and they're not. And I think those wall labels tend to be written by art historians who come at the work with a very particular perspective, but one that is not, they don't have a monopoly, of course, on that interpretation. So I think for me, there's something about staying in the work, right? Paying attention to those decisions that really helped me step away from the context, brush away the snobbery, and feel like I was looking at art face to face with less artifice and more mystery than I ever had before. And I would suggest for people who are trying to develop their eye to slow down, engage in slow looking, right? Like as a security guard, I would give myself the assignment to spend 40 minutes with a single piece on each post. And I kept discovering new things in that work after 40 minutes, after 4 hours, after 4 weeks. Not every piece, but there are those ones that begin to really, you develop a relationship with them and they keep offering up something new. But yeah, stay in the work and then also look at art in more places. It's not that the work in museums can't be soul-shakingly amazing, but I also think, as I read in my book, there are flaws in the machine. And I think one way to begin to fix those for yourself is to widen your horizons. Go look at the uncelebrated art, the art that surprises you, the unexpected works by emerging artists in art schools, in the galleries in people's garages. I think that we could gain something by spending maybe a little less time just communing with the masterpieces.
We at 4A Arts, 3 of the pillars of our mission statement is to catalyze, prioritize, and democratize art. Because as I said in the introduction, we want to see no distinction between high art, low art, fine art, and the other arts, and that design and craft and quilting and pottery and hot rod car decoration is just as creative as fine masterpieces in museums. And so I love that your effort to try to essentially democratize art and make it less of a gated community and let everybody realize that they are fully capable of experiencing paintings in a museum is so important for our democracy, frankly, and for human interaction. And I love that you have been able to have that angle. Also, on a personal note, I have to say I was poisoned going to museums as a kid because my wonderful mother, who exposed me to so many museums and on our travels, she had a sense of she was going to get her money's worth. And if she didn't read every single one of those labels next to a painting, which then for my 10-year-old self made museum going absolutely horrible. And just, it was a kind of a trauma that I experienced of being like, it's going to take hours and hours to get through this. And
Right.
I'm expected to read everything. And frankly, I don't care that much, especially as a 10-year-old, unfortunately.
Right.
And now as an adult, I have come into my own to say, you know what, if you spend 40 minutes in a museum, if you spend 20 minutes in a museum, but you have a real slow experience with a piece, hey, that your life has just been punctuated by a moment that will stay with you. And it doesn't matter how long you stay. And I especially endorse the idea of just blow past the explanations on the side if you want, and just try to have your own experience with something. And I believe I heard in another interview that you talk about try to find 5 things, right?
Right.
That you notice about a piece. And if I may, like, it can be just like, oh, I don't really like that blue, or oh, the subjects in the painting are doing something that I wouldn't do. It doesn't matter. But as long as you're having a like mini conversation with the painting, that's an experience in itself, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I would say I used to be like your mother. I mean, really, I just felt like
Uh-huh.
scorched earth viewing was the way to get
Yeah.
my money's worth. Like I had to
Right.
see every single thing.
Yeah.
And I think working at as a guard, look, I mean, you also have the luxury of just hanging around with the work so much that
Mm.
you have the luxury to not kind of like, force yourself to take it all in one moment. But nonetheless, it convinced me that see everything, read everything approach is sort of, oof, it's like eating everything at an all you can eat buffet and then wondering
Yeah.
why you feel ill.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, the sushi and the waffles and the mimosa and like the cheese curds were like all kind of a lot for one sitting.
Yep.
And I think that there's something to be said for that kind of a la carte viewing, as long as you do push yourself a bit to
Mhm.
stay with the work. And
Mhm.
when you think about how these museums come together, I was there in these moments, like selling art to museum curators, to museum patrons, to seeing these works coming together for shows. And let me tell you that what ends up on the walls of these museums, contrary, I think, to my expectation, is not necessarily the best that culture has to offer. Like what
Mhm.
you see in the museum is sort of the best that these humans could do based on the certain limitations they had, based on their own subjectivities, based on their own biases. And you don't have to like everything,
Mhm.
and you don't even have to see everything. But if there's, maybe one or two pieces in a visit that you just let yourself stay with them, kind of, I think you can trust yourself to follow your own interests through an exhibit and just linger with some pieces. It is okay to play favorites, is I guess what I'm trying to say. But yeah, when you get to that work, do challenge yourself to notice 5 things, and they don't have to be
Mm.
grandiose. It does not
No.
have to be, how this is some like meditation on, you know, society in the wake of the French Revolution or something. I mean, it
Right.
could just literally be like, oh my God, that woman's butt is the most juicy thing I've ever seen. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just,
Whatever it may be.
it could be a little carnal. I don't know. It could be
Yeah.
funny. It could be weird.
Sure.
But I
And
think the way you,
art should be fun and funny and weird, and we should have a sense of humor about it, I think, so often. And however it strikes you, go with it.
yeah, and it should be human. I mean, I do think
Mhm.
that going back to this idea of the decisions in the physical form of a piece, yeah, I think the modernists kind of started this idea that art should be a little bloodless and philosophical, right? I mean,
Mhm.
they were some of the first, going back to this whole idea of beauty, they're the first to kind of say, our world doesn't deserve beauty.
Yep.
Beauty is too frivolous for us.
Particularly
And
after World War One
particularly after
and the
World War
slaughter.
One,
Mhm.
in the aftermath of, the pain and the hardship and all the horrible things that were witnessed, there was this fear that, you know, our current barbaric age didn't deserve beauty, that,
Mhm.
it didn't have a place. And I think that, for me, I think there's something really powerful about thinking of art in terms of it being another person, almost like that you
Mhm.
are a body in space. It is a body in space. It is very different to sit down with someone over FaceTime than it is over dinner. And likewise, it's very different to see a work on Instagram as it is to be in a space with it, kind of breathing the same air. And I was just going back to what you said about, democratizing work. I mean, I have so much to say about this subject, but two things very briefly. One is, as part of the research for this book, I ended up having a nearly naked stranger sit on my face in the name of art.
Yep. It's a great
And
passage, by the way. It's a
thank you.
great read.
And this was a rather thought-provoking and surprising experience. The artist in question had spent a few years performing on Instagram as a butt influencer. So this was someone who, had attracted hundreds of thousands of followers for posting photos of her butt. And her work raised a lot of questions for me about what is art. And I think that, to your point about celebrating the needlepoint pillows as well as the marble busts, it was revealing to me to realize that we are living in the aftermath of status conscious Europeans' rather arbitrary decision to elevate some things to the status of fine art and dismiss everything else as sort of pure craft. Whereas if you go back a little bit further in history, for a long time, art was considered anything requiring human ingenuity and skill. So art could be passing laws, training horses, blowing glass, carving marble sculptures. And I think that realizing that and engaging with work like someone like Mandy Allfire, this butt influencer, was so liberating because it really opened me up to seeing art everywhere, to being open to feeling that jostle that we experience with art in everything from a hot dog cart on the side of the road in Central Park to a Brancusi sculpture in the Guggenheim. And I think on a related note, I think that helps explain a bit why art is so fundamental to our humanity. And artists and scientists agree on that point. And I think they've reached a similar explanation for why that is the case. And that is that art helps us fight the reducing tendencies of our minds. Art pushes our brains out of their well-worn pathways. They sort of keep them from overfitting to the data that we have around us. And, to your point, I think a bit to, the mission of what you're trying to do, I would go so far as to say that I believe that there is an artist in each of us to the extent that we struggle to keep our brains from compressing our experience of the world. And in that sense, art can be an object, but it's also a decision, right? It's a fight against complacency. It's a choice to live a life that's more challenging and ultimately more beautiful.
Also, our founder always says every single one of us makes creative decisions every day that are aesthetic or thought-provoking or whatever, just down to the fact that how you dress yourself in the morning. And I don't mean like fabulously. I mean just like putting on this t-shirt and this jeans, and hopefully that's a creative decision we're making constantly. We are all artists. It is all inside of us. You might be able to argue that journalism is or is not art, but I would say that journalism is certainly based in fact and trying to inform people in ways that art would differ. However, I couldn't help thinking that while I was reading the book, you were an artist. In the process of the research and frankly code switching. You probably were an actor an awful lot of the time. You were making creative decisions to get to the point and get your research and whatnot. Did you ever feel like an artist in the process?
It's funny, you're not the first person to ask me that question, and it's one that I've grappled with a lot. I think, I don't go around identifying myself as an artist. I tell people I'm a journalist and an author. But nonetheless, I think that I've certainly, there were pieces in one of the recent Whitney biennials where I looked at it and I was like, I would call that journalism. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, that reminds me of what a journalist does, but here it is in an art museum and it is under the label of art. And so I think that, it's a great question. It's one that I continue to wrestle with. I've had people emailing me or just reaching out to tell me that they think that I am an artist and what I'm doing is art. But like I said, it's not something I've had printed on a business card anywhere.
Well, it seemed very artistic to me.
Thank you.
In the time when you were working at the Guggenheim, so often I was just so curious to know what were the artistic perspectives of some of the people around you, and you go into it about the attitudes about art of your fellow security guards to the coat checkers and whatnot. But can you share with us part of how working at the Guggenheim changed or informed the other staff members around you?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the reasons that I became a guard was because I was interested in knowing how would being around art for
Hmm.
hours on end with no possibility for
Yeah.
escape shape my
Right.
experience of art? And here I am, advocating for slow looking, but the reality is like, before I became a guard at the Guggenheim, the number of times that I had spent, more than, I don't know, 15 minutes contemplating an artwork was zero. I mean,
Right.
it took like, countless security cameras and the threat of getting fired to force myself to really slow down and spend time with an artwork. Now, I will say that it was really wonderful to see the way that the work acted on my
Hmm.
fellow guards. There were people that I remember, someone that started around the same time as me, who came in and looked a bit skeptically at the Guggenheim's collection. The Guggenheim does have your classic, a couple Picassos and Van Goghs, but it also has what would be described by some as like FU
Hmm.
art, art that's like, it's weird. It's not obviously recognizable as art. One of the pieces that we had to guard was basically a bare light bulb dangling over, a wooden table and
With
chairs that were
with a
gathering dust. And we
critical
had to make
layer
sure,
of dust.
critical layer of dust. We had to spend 40 minutes not moving more. It was a locked post. So we couldn't stray more than like 10 feet away from the dust because the dust was considered a crucial part of the artwork and could not be disturbed. And, initially, I think one of my colleagues was like, yeah, I don't know about this stuff. And it was funny. We talked a couple weeks in when we were both, on the post taking tickets from people as they entered. And he was like, I've realized that I love art. You know what I mean? Like, it had just permeated his soul in this way. And I will say that, like, there's, guards are not, it depends on the institution. They're not always allowed to engage in long conversations with visitors. But if you have the opportunity to engage guards in conversations about the art, I think, you'll find some of the most thoughtful and interesting reflections. I also met a guard at the Whitney who was like, told me how he had pointed out something about a painting to one of the curators, like that she had never noticed
Ah,
this before. And, he had just spent so much time studying that work and immersed in it. I mean, I think guards are remarkable because I would argue they spend more time around the art than
no
just about
doubt.
anybody, more than
No
the
doubt.
artists, more than collectors, more than the curators. I mean, there were guards I worked with who'd been there since the invention of
Hmm.
disco, right? I mean, they just have seen these works
Yeah.
evolve, and it's incredible. But yeah, I think the last thing I'll say, though, is going back to what we talked about before around beauty. It was amazing. I think when you look at sort of the mission statements of a lot of institutions, they have these very admirable but very lofty sounding goals of, I don't know, like education and
Right.
this, that, the other. And I love, there was a guard who was like, being around art lets you just experience beauty. And it is this feeling of being rich, full
Hmm.
stop, right? That was what was important to her. That was what was meaningful about what she was doing, is that this museum, this place was a place where anybody from anywhere in the world, from any income bracket, could come and
Hmm.
experience beauty.
That's beautiful.
And I love
That's
that.
beautiful. um, have you kept in touch with some of the folks that you wrote about? Jack, Elizabeth, Julie, Amanda. What do they think about the book?
Yeah, I have kept in touch with them. I haven't discussed the book at length with everybody who's in it, but I've been really delighted by the responses I've had. I mean, people who have been in the book have been so fantastically supportive in so many different ways, and I'm really grateful. And at the same time, I mean, it's been really wonderful to hear from a wide variety of artists from all over the world who I didn't know before, who've said, and this really means a lot to me, that they're like, I'm so excited for my family and all the people in my life to read your book so they
Hmm.
understand me. And that meant a lot. I think that they know this world, they have a lot at stake. And for them to find something in this book that I wrote that really resonated with them and felt true made me very happy to hear.
What artistic experience are you most looking forward to in the near future?
Oh, well, I mean, I have to say that I'm really looking forward to like going to the next gallery that I've never
Hmm.
been to, or like seeing the next artwork by an artist I don't know. I mean, as I said before, I think that there's a lot to be gained from pushing ourselves and from pushing our eye, and from surprising ourselves with our experiences
Hmm.
of art. And, I think that Julie Curtis really helped me understand that taste was not a destination. Like, I'd always thought of taste as like you had to have the right taste, that an artwork, if you badgered it long enough under hot lights, it would confess to being either great or terrible or mediocre. But then there was really like a right answer when it came to taste. And I think that in these conversations that we would have in her studio, she helped me think of taste, again, not as a destination, but as a journey. As this thing to kind of keep stretching yourself, to keep pushing yourself. As you put it, like with new tastes comes a new self. And I found that just really delightful. Like, I think that I feel like I've had artistic experiences in the last few months everywhere from, like an art fair to a miniature train exhibition. And I think one of the things that's been a real blast in the aftermath, or I should say one of the things that's been a real blast along the course of this journey is going on these art adventures. And I think that, museums are wonderful places. Again, like, and yet at the same time, they are sort of these encyclopedias of taste, right? They reflect like what a large number of people could agree on at different periods of time. Going to an artist's studio or going to these, galleries that work with up and coming artists. I mean, it's like going into a scientist's lab. Not everything is figured out, but getting close to the source gets you close to the sort of invention, inspiration, the sort of wild experimentation that's going on with art in this moment. So I'm excited for more of that.
On that note, and final question here, we talked briefly about how you are a fairly new mother. You have a 2-year-old. As a father of older kids, I would say that's still new. What are you most looking forward to experiencing with your little one artistically?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I would say so I live in New York City, so we have a limited amount of space. And I will say that one thing that I'm very excited about doing with my son when the weather gets nice is like taking him to Central Park and like letting him like hopefully just like go nuts with paints and paper and like just make a mess somewhere outside. I will say he was actually in his very youthful years was very helpful to me in designing the book cover. So as I was like brainstorming this book cover, I had this vision of like, the title with like these like smears of paint around it, sort of like you were looking at an artist's palette. And so I dragged him out with me one day and literally like mocked up a possible version of the cover with like smears of paint on the side of a piece of paper. So that was fun. And now maybe he can have a little more agency in doing that and not just, be forced to like, watch me paint. But yeah, I'm excited for that. Making art was a big part of my childhood, and it's one that I hope to share.
We all should. We should all be so lucky. Thank you so much for your time, Bianca. Congratulations on the book. I hope it changes all of our perspectives on the art world and democratizes it for that matter as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope so too.